Happy Earth Day. We're so glad to be here with you today. I'm Schanee and this is Kara.
Hi.
This is a rare treat because you get to see us both together. Usually one of us has the camera while the other is on air, but today we decided to spice things up a little bit and both be on to talk about something that I think is really important to both of us and really to wildlife and hopefully humans around the world, and that's the trade in wildlife and some of the situations that wildlife are encountering throughout the world. So throughout today's broadcast, Kara and I are going to show some different artifacts, and we call them biofacts here at the zoo. These are animal pieces that somehow or another have come here to the zoo. We'll let you know a little bit about each piece as it goes, because I know that's a question that often people have. But these animal artifacts or biofacts allow us then to help continue to teach people about wildlife. It allows the animal to continue to be an ambassador for its species and to continue to promote that critical message of conservation, caring, and connecting people and wildlife and wild places together. So the first piece we'd like to talk about is this tiger right here. Now this particular piece has a really sad but interesting Wichita connection. Over the last couple years, what happened is that trafficking or trying to purchase things like tiger rugs is actually illegal. There was a gentleman here in town, right here in Wichita, that decided that he wanted to buy or purchase a couple of tiger pelts. He contacted someone to try and broker that deal. Luckily for wildlife, that someone that he contacted was actually an undercover agent for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, or was connected to an agent. They then went ahead and set up an operation to go ahead and have that transaction occur, where the gentleman here in Wichita paid someone to transport two tiger pelts, or a tiger pelt, from another state into Wichita. The trade was made at one of our local convenience stores, and then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as the court systems, followed him to his home, where they arrested him and confiscated the tiger that he had just purchased. And when they went into the house, they also found that he had had a lion pelt in his house as well. Once that court case was all complete, he did plead. He was charged. He was guilty. He did get some penalties, including the forfeiture of the different artifacts. Once those all occurred, then the Kansas District Attorney and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service worked together to make sure that the hides that were used could go into the hands of zoos, where we could continue to tell the story about wildlife trade and really the horrific consequences that are left behind. Now this particular pelt is in really bad condition. What you're seeing here is the head, but if I turn this just slightly, you can see it's actually a full rug. But the rug is falling apart. So one of the things that we are going to do is try and salvage the pieces that we can to make sure that this tiger's life wasn't in vain, that we can continue to help educate people about the plight of tigers and other wildlife that are trafficked heavily. Kara, you have an animal that is really heavily trafficked.
Yes, I am with the pangolin, and the pangolin is an animal that is trafficked for its scales, which are really just modified hairs. In folk medicine, there's a lot of different uses for the pangolin scales, none of which have any foundation in science. The pangolin is actually the most trafficked wildlife species that no one ever knew about. These animals have sort of a reclusive life, so they are busy doing things like eating termites and other insects. You can see his, well, I hope you can see his claws. I can't move him because he's quite heavy. But they use their claws to tear in and find insects, and then they've got a really long tongue that they use to slurp them up. But as I've said, we know from science that there is no medicinal value of its body.
And this particular pangolin is interesting. It came from a university library collection. There was a university here in town that had a museum collection. When the university decided to close that museum, they donated several pieces to us. One of them is this pangolin, and I think it's such an amazing resource for us to have here in Wichita because, Kara, I've never seen a pangolin before besides this one.
I haven't either, and I've never heard that story before either, so I just learned something new. The pangolin has been here longer than I have, and I didn't know how it got here, but now I know.
It's been here longer than I have been too, so it's one of those artifacts that we continue to utilize and to help educate people about. Now this, however, is a newer artifact to us. This has been here from one of our current elephants. What happens is, this isn't an elephant tusk, it is ivory. It's made out of the same product as your teeth. So you have ivory, elephants have ivory, your dogs have ivory, your cats have ivory. Ivory is just a tooth. With an elephant, however, they have these large outer teeth that grow, which allow them to help dig into the ground. It helps them tear down trees. It's a great tool for them to be able to use. Sadly, however, this ivory is also very valuable for trinkets and other things that I would say actually would look better on the elephant than on our kitchen tables.
I agree.
But what happens is about 96 elephants are killed every year in Africa. Every day in Africa, specifically for this ivory. That's it. The animal loses its life just because of this magnificent tusk. So we can make a difference because the United States is actually the #2 consumer of ivory in the world. There's nothing that we use it for beneficially. It's just so we can have something pretty. So we ask that you today remember that when you're traveling abroad, when you go anywhere on vacation, make sure that you don't make a wildlife product part of your memories. Make sure that you don't purchase things like wildlife products to bring home, because often it's the animal that loses its life for that product.
Yeah, they're paying the ultimate price. Another animal that pays an ultimate price are sharks. Scientifically, we don't have a lot of natural history information on sharks because they're hard to study. They go to the depths of the ocean. One of the perils that sharks face is that they're used for shark fin soup. So people will use the fins of the shark and then leave the animal to die, and that means that that animal can no longer breed. And for some species of shark, they're very long-lived, and so by taking one out of the breeding population, it can have a huge impact on the whole population in general. Another problem sharks face is persecution. I know we've all seen Jaws. You're more likely to be struck by lightning than you are to be attacked by a shark, especially if you live in Kansas. But sharks do face some persecution, which makes them less warm and fuzzy to some of our friends.
Another animal that has faced persecution because part of its body part is the rhino. This happens to be a rhinoceros horn. Now again, when we talked about the ivory from the elephant, we talked about that it was tusk, it was tooth. This horn, however, is actually modified hair. It's made out of the same keratin that your hair and your fingernails are made out of, and it compresses together for this horn. The horn, sadly, again with myths, there's a lot of myths that are out there. The myths that the horn can bring you strength and bring you agility, and a lot of other things just simply aren't true. And sadly, the rhinos are killed. The horns are taken off, and that's, again, the only piece that is used, and then either ground up as powder and used medicinally, and again, no scientific proof that there's any benefit to it, or in some cultures, even owning a relic made out of rhino horn is a rite of passage. So trying to change some of those beliefs out there is an important aspect, and I guess I would challenge us, do we have rites of passage that we use here in the United States even that might not be as environmentally friendly? And can we change or alter some of our lifestyles to make sure that we're putting wildlife in wild places first?
Well, speaking of altering lifestyles, there are some things that you can do to help wildlife. One example is, this is the shell of an ornate box turtle, our state reptile, and we have some concerns about ornate box turtles because we don't have definitive data that tells us how many are alive in our state. So we can't say with certainty what the population stability is. But like I said, one of the things that you can do is become engaged in citizen science, and lucky for you, Sedgwick County Zoo does a box turtle survey where we do the training for you, and you can go out into a particular parcel and survey how many box turtles you're seeing in the area, so we can get that definitive data that we need to be scientifically accurate in our determinations of populations.
Now, we've talked about a lot of areas where we either have had not success yet or we're hoping for success. This is the egg that is a success story. Now, everybody out there, think about what is our national symbol for wildlife. Give you a second. Of course, it's the bald eagle. When we think of pride and glory for our country, the bald eagle often comes into play. But believe it or not, they were critically endangered. One of the reasons that they were critically endangered is because some of the chemicals that we were using that unknowingly had dramatically negative effects, not only on bald eagles, but on lots of birds. And so what happened is there was a chemical called DDT that, although it is banned here in the United States, an important thing to know is that it is not banned throughout the world. So it is still being used in other places throughout the world. And remember, many of our animals share different continents. So just because an animal is protected here in the United States doesn't necessarily mean that it's protected from some of those same harms in another country. So the bald eagle will lay their eggs in a large nest, and I mean a large nest, not a little nest, a nest that can be the size of a car. They will come back to that nest year after year and continue to build it. But what was happening is that the insects and animals that they were eating were coated with that DDT, and it becomes an increasing biologic problem. So they might eat a little bit, and a little bit was okay, but then they eat a little bit more, and before you knew it, even though that fish might have just a little bit of DDT in it, by the time they ate 5 fish with it, then all of a sudden that bird had a larger amount in its system. And that made its eagle eggs fragile. So when the birds would come and lovingly sit on the eggs to keep them warm and protected, the weight of the bird, which isn't much by the way, would actually fracture the egg and not allow then the chick to continue to grow inside. So wonderful wildlife laws out there have helped protect animals like bald eagles. And one of the things that one of my former bosses told me once was that conservation starts on election day. So if wildlife and wild places are important to you, one of the things that you should do when you're voting is make sure that the candidates that you are voting for also have those same beliefs out there. We can make a difference, but we also need to have the wildlife laws in place to ensure that those animals can keep safe throughout the United States and hopefully abroad.
Speaking of animals abroad, I hope that you joined us, and if you didn't, you can go back and watch our Facebook Live video with Abra about cassowary. And cassowaries are facing some problems. Their biggest problem is cars. They don't know how to look both ways before they cross the street, and so there's a lot of roadkill cassowary. They're also facing some problems with habitat destruction. Now, Sedgwick County Zoo is not a place that just sits around and watches these things happen. We put boots on the ground for conservation, and we're working with non-governmental agencies abroad to make sure that cassowaries have the forests that they need to survive. Oh, and I almost forgot to talk about this. When we were visiting with the cassowary, there were questions about their wings. This is one of the modified wing feathers that the cassowary has. And do you know how many they have in all?
I would say it's about half a dozen.
Yeah, and they're very sharp at the end, and it's just basically just the center quill that comes through, and it's very, very hard, like wire. I'm not going to try to break it, but you can see that I'm adding a little pressure. This is a cassowary feather. I don't know how well you can see it. I know I can't zoom in right now. But this feather is not designed for flight. It's designed to help the cassowary look good, for both the ladies and the gentleman cassowary, and it helps keep them just the right temperature and helps rain run off of their bodies rather than sink into their feathers.
I hope you enjoyed spending a little time with us today as we looked at some of the beautiful wildlife that we share this planet with and some of the great conservation work that's actually going to help them. Although we sometimes feel sad about the things that are happening, know that you can make a difference. Each and every day when we make small choices, we say no to a straw, we bring our own bags in, we choose to carpool or walk someplace instead of drive. That makes an impact. We're seeing that already today as more of us are staying at home instead of commuting. There's air pollution that has been cleaned up in areas that they haven't seen in people's lifetimes. So know that each and every moment, every small thing can make a difference. And we encourage you guys all to go out and enjoy wildlife today, enjoy those wild places, and know that even though we're closed, we're still caring.